It's funny, the things you remember from the road. It's not always the big, dramatic stuff. More often, it's the quiet moments, the ones that sneak up on you in the dead of night, hundreds of miles from anywhere that feels like home. This job, it's a lonely one. You've got your rig, your thoughts, and the endless ribbon of highways stretching out in front of you. You get used to the solitude, even come to crave it sometimes. But every now and then you have an encounter, a brief connection with another soul out there in the vast emptiness, and it sticks with you. This particular memory starts on a Tuesday. I was hauling a load of something forgettable, probably machine parts or processed food, from Southern California, heading east. The plan was to push through to Salt Lake City, a straight shot across the desert. I'd done this route 100 times, knew every dip and curve, every greasy spoon with a decent cup of coffee. It was a familiar kind of tired, the kind that settles deep in your bones after a long day of driving. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the world a wash of inky blackness, broken only by the twin beams of my headlights cutting through the darkness. The air was still and cool, the kind of night where you can almost hear the stars humming. I had the windows down, letting the desert air whip through the cab, the smell of sagebrush and dust filling my nostrils. I was making good time, the big engine a steady rumble beneath me. The miles were ticking by, each one a small victory against the vastness of the American landscape. But even the most seasoned driver has his limits. My eyes were starting to feel like sandpaper, and the white lines on the road were beginning to blur together. I knew I needed to pull over, grab a few hours of sleep before I pushed on. There was a little truck stop up ahead, a place I'd passed a dozen times but never stopped at. It wasn't much, just a handful of pumps, a small convenience store, and a gravel lot big enough for a few rigs. But tonight, it felt like an oasis. I eased my rig off the highway. The crunch of gravel under the tires a welcome sound. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. For a moment I just sat there, listening to the universe hum. As I stepped out of the cab, stretching my stiff limbs, I noticed another truck parked a few spaces down. It was an older model, a bit beat up but clean. A light was on in the cab, a warm, inviting glow in the otherwise dark lot. It was then that he stepped out, a man about my age, maybe a little older. He had a kind face, weathered by years of sun and wind, and a smile that reached his eyes. We nodded at each other, the universal greeting of the road. And that's how it started. A simple conversation under a blanket of stars in the middle of the Nevada desert. A conversation that I would carry with me for a long, long time.
The week had started like any other. A call from dispatch, a new assignment, and the familiar routine of prepping the rig for another long haul. This time, it was a load of something I couldn't even remember. Probably produce or dry goods from a warehouse in Bakersfield, California, to a distribution center in Denver, Colorado. A straight shot, for the most part, across some of the most desolate and beautiful country this nation has to offer. I'd been driving for over 15 years, and the rhythm of the road was as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. The low rumble of the engine, the hiss of the air brakes, the ever-changing scenery scrolling past my window. This was my office, my world. I'd left Bakersfield before dawn, the sky a pale pre-dawn gray. The city lights had quickly faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by the vast, open expanse of the Mojave Desert. As the sun climbed higher, it painted the landscape in hues of orange and gold, the Joshua trees casting long, skeletal shadows across the sand. I pushed on through the day, the miles melting away under my wheels. The monotony of the drive can be a killer, a slow, creeping fatigue that can dull your senses and make you careless. To combat it, I had my rituals. A thermos of strong black coffee, a collection of old-school country music CDs, and the occasional phone call to my wife, her voice a welcome anchor to the world beyond my windshield. By the time I hit the Nevada state line, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the desert in a soft, ethereal light. The landscape here is different, starker, more imposing. The mountains in the distance look like jagged teeth against the bruised purple sky. I was on US Route 50, a stretch of road so remote and sparsely populated that it's been dubbed the loneliest road in America, and for good reason. For miles on end, there's nothing but sagebrush, sand, and the occasional dust-caked ghost town. It's the kind of place that can make a man feel small, insignificant, a tiny speck in a vast, unforgiving wilderness. As darkness fell, the world outside my cab dissolved into a sea of black. The only light came from my headlights, cutting a narrow path through the inky void. It's a strange feeling, driving through the desert at night. The silence is profound, broken only by the hum of the engine and the whoosh of wind. You feel like you're the only person left on Earth, a solitary traveler on a journey to nowhere. But there's a beauty in it, too. The stars out here are a sight to behold, a brilliant, glittering canopy that stretches from horizon to horizon. They seem so close you could almost reach out and touch them. It was on one of these long, dark stretches of road, somewhere in the heart of Nevada, that I saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. A truck stop. A tiny beacon of civilization in a world of darkness.
The truck stop was nothing more than a small, unassuming building, its paint peeling in the harsh desert sun. A single, flickering fluorescent light illuminated the sign, which read, Desert Oasis. A bit of an overstatement, I thought, but at that point, any sign of life was a welcome sight. I pulled my rig into the gravel lot, the crunch of the tires the only sound in the still night air. There was only one other truck there, an older Peterbilt, its chrome polished to a dull shine under the dim light. A light was on in the cab, a warm, yellow glow that seemed to beckon me closer. I shut down my engine, the sudden silence a stark contrast to the constant rumble that had been my companion for the past 12 hours. I sat for a moment, letting the quiet wash over me, the exhaustion of the long day settling deep into my bones. My body ached, my eyes burned, and my mind was a jumble of road signs and mile markers. I knew I needed to get some rest, but first, a cup of coffee. A real cup, not the lukewarm sludge I'd been sipping from my thermos. As I climbed down from the cab, a figure emerged from the other truck. He was a man of about my age, maybe a little older, with a weathered face and a kind smile. He wore a faded flannel shirt and a pair of worn blue jeans, his hands calloused and stained with grease. He nodded in my direction, a silent greeting that spoke volumes. In the world of trucking, there's an unspoken camaraderie, a bond forged by the shared experience of the open road. We were two strangers, 1,000 miles from home, but in that moment, we were brothers. "Evening," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "The evening," I replied, my own voice hoarse from disuse. "Long haul?" he asked, a knowing look in his eyes. "Aren't they all?" I said, with a wry smile. He chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that echoed in the quiet night. "That they are, my friend, that they are." We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, the only sound the gentle hum of the desert wind. In the distance, a coyote howled, its lonely cry a fitting soundtrack to our meeting. I had a feeling this wasn't going to be just a quick coffee stop. There was something about this man, a quiet wisdom in his eyes that made me want to linger, to share a story or two. And in the vast, empty expanse of the Nevada desert, a little human connection can feel like a lifeline.
We made our way inside the truck stop, the ding of the bell above the door announcing our arrival. The place was small and sparsely furnished, with a few worn-out booths and a lunch counter that had seen better days. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fried food, a familiar and strangely comforting aroma. A young woman with tired eyes and a friendly smile greeted us from behind the counter. "Evening, fellas," she said, her voice a welcome break from the silence of the night. "Coffee's fresh?" "2 cups, please," the other trucker said, his voice filling the small space. We took a seat at the counter, the worn vinyl of the stools cool against my skin. The woman brought us our coffee, the steam rising in lazy spirals in the dim light. We sat for a moment, sipping our coffee in silence, the warmth of the mugs a welcome comfort in our hands. I haven't seen you around here before, he said, breaking the silence. Don't usually stop on this stretch, usually push through to Winnemucca. Winnemucca's a good stop, but this place, it has its own kind of charm. He gestured to the empty room with a sweep of his hand. Quiet, peaceful, a good place to think. We ordered some food, a greasy burger for me, a plate of eggs and bacon for him. As we ate, he began to talk, his voice a low, steady murmur. He told me about his life, about the years he'd spent on the road, the places he'd been, the things he'd seen. He'd started driving in his early 20s, fresh out of the Army, and had never looked back. He'd hauled everything from cattle to Christmas trees, crisscrossing the country more times than he could count. He spoke of the loneliness of the road, the long hours spent in solitude, the ache of being away from family. But he also spoke of the freedom, the sense of adventure, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. He talked about the sunrises he'd witnessed over the Rocky Mountains, the thunderstorms he'd driven through in the plains of Kansas, the feel of the open road stretching out before him like a promise. He painted a vivid picture of his life, a life lived on the move, a life of constant motion. And as I listened, I found myself nodding in agreement, recognizing my own experiences in his words. We were two different men from two different places, but our lives had followed a similar path, a path paved with asphalt and diesel fuel.
He paused for a moment, taking a long sip of his coffee. The silence in the small diner was punctuated only by the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle clinking of our forks against our plates. He seemed to be lost in thought, his eyes distant, as if he were seeing something far beyond the walls of the truck stop. "This life," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "it takes a toll. On your body, on your mind, on your soul." He told me about the physical strain of the job, the long hours spent sitting in the same position, the constant vibration of the engine, the unhealthy food and lack of exercise. He talked about the mental fatigue, the stress of tight deadlines and unpredictable road conditions, the constant pressure to keep moving, to keep pushing forward. But it was the emotional toll that seemed to weigh on him the most. He spoke of the isolation, the profound sense of loneliness that can creep in during the long, dark hours of the night. He talked about the missed birthdays, the holidays spent in a truck stop diner, the ache of being a stranger in his own home. He told me about the strain it had put on his marriage, the arguments over the phone, the long silences that spoke of a growing distance between them. "It's a hard life for a family man," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're out here, on your own, and they're back home, trying to hold things together without you." He pulled out his wallet and showed me a picture of his wife. She was a beautiful woman with a warm smile and kind eyes. He told me her name was Sarah, and that they'd been married for 30 years. He spoke of her with a love and a reverence that was palpable, a love that had endured the long miles and the lonely nights. "She's the reason I do it," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "She's the one who keeps me going, the one who's waiting for me at the end of the road." He told me about their plans for the future, about the small house they'd bought in a quiet town in Oregon, about the garden he was going to plant, about the fishing trips they were going to take. He spoke of a life beyond the road, a life of peace and quiet, a life where he could finally be home.
As he spoke, I found myself sharing my own stories, my own struggles. I told him about my wife, about the life we had built together, about the ache of leaving her behind with each new trip. I spoke of the loneliness I felt, the weariness that seemed to seep into my bones, the constant struggle to find a balance between my love for the road and my love for my family. We talked for hours, two strangers in a deserted truck stop, sharing our deepest fears and our most cherished dreams. We spoke of the camaraderie of the road, the unspoken bond that connects all truckers, the shared understanding of a life lived in motion. We were two ships passing in the night, but for a few brief hours we had found a safe harbor, a place to rest and refuel, not just our trucks, but our souls. The first hint that dawn was beginning to break in the east, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. We walked outside, the cool desert air a welcome relief after the stuffy diner. We stood there for a moment, watching the sun climb higher, its golden rays chasing away the shadows of the night. "It's a beautiful sight," he said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "No matter how many times I see it, it never gets old." "No," I said, my own voice filled with a similar sense of awe. "It never does." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the world awaken. The desert, which had seemed so dark and menacing just a few hours before, was now bathed in a soft, golden light. The mountains in the distance were etched in sharp relief against the brightening sky, their rugged peaks a testament to the enduring power of nature. In that moment, I felt the sense of peace, a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in a long time. The weariness of the road, the loneliness, the constant struggle, it all seemed to fade away in the face of that beautiful sunrise. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was not alone.
We finished our coffee, the warmth of the mugs a welcome comfort in the cool morning air. The sun was higher now, its rays casting long shadows across the gravel lot. It was time to go. We both had miles to cover, deadlines to meet, promises to keep. "Well," he said, extending his hand, "it was good to meet you." "You too," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his hand calloused and strong, the hand of a man who had worked hard his entire life. "You be safe out there," he said, his eyes filled with a genuine concern. "You too," I replied. We stood there for a moment longer, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we had formed. We were two strangers who had shared a piece of our lives, two souls who had found a moment of connection in the vast emptiness of the desert. And in that moment, we were no longer strangers. He turned and walked back to his truck, his steps slow and steady. I watched him go, a strange sense of loss washing over me. I knew that I would probably never see him again, that our paths would likely never cross. But I also knew that I would never forget him. I climbed back into my own rig, the familiar scent of diesel and coffee a welcome comfort. I started the engine, the low rumble a familiar song. As I pulled out of the truck stop, I saw him in my rearview mirror, standing by his truck watching me go. I gave him a short blast of the horn, a final farewell, and he raised his hand in a silent wave. I turned my rig back onto the highway, the rising sun at my back. The road stretched out before me, a long black ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the horizon. The desert was alive with the morning light, the sagebrush and sand a sea of gold and green. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a new energy coursing through my veins. The conversation with the old trucker had reminded me of why I did this job, why I endured the long hours and the lonely nights. It was for the freedom, the adventure, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. But most of all, it was for my wife, for the life we were building together, for the promise of a future beyond the road.
I drove through the day, the miles melting away under my wheels. The memory of the old trucker stayed with me, a warm and comforting presence in the cab of my truck. I thought about his stories, about his wife, about the life he had lived, and I thought about my own life, about the choices I had made, about the road that stretched out before me. I made it to Denver late that night, the city lights a welcome sight after the long, dark miles of the highway. I dropped off my load, the familiar routine, a welcome comfort after the emotional intensity of the past 24 hours. And then, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I booked a flight home. The next morning, I was on a plane, soaring high above the country I had just driven across. From up here, the world looked different, smaller, more manageable. I could see the highways I had traveled, the mountains I had crossed, the deserts I had endured, and I could see the cities and towns where people lived their lives, where families were built, where dreams were born. When I got home, my wife was waiting for me at the airport. The look on her face when she saw me was a mixture of surprise and relief, a look that told me everything I needed to know. I wrapped her in my arms, the feel of her in my arms a welcome anchor after the long, lonely miles of the road. That night, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset,
I told her about the old trucker, about our conversation in the deserted truck stop in the middle of the Nevada desert. I told her about his wife, about their plans for the future, about the love that had sustained them through all the years of separation. And as I spoke, I realized that the old trucker had given me a gift of perspective, a gift of hope. He had reminded me that the road doesn't have to be a lonely place, that even in the darkest of nights, there is always the promise of a new day. I still drive, of course. It's in my blood. But something has changed. The loneliness is still there, a constant companion on the long, dark stretches of the highway. But now, it's different. It's a loneliness that is tempered by the memory of a shared sunrise, a shared story, a shared hope. And every now and then, when I'm out on the road, somewhere in the vast, empty expanse of the American landscape, I'll see an old, beat-up Peterbilt, and I'll smile. And I'll remember the old trucker, the man who taught me that even on the loneliest road in America, you're never truly alone. And I'll send a silent thank you out into the universe, a thank you for the gift of a shared story, a shared sunrise, and a shared hope. The road is long, but it's a good road, and it always leads home.